Welcome back. This is Jason from Santan Solar, your home of the one-stop source for all your solar needs. This video is for homeowners and DIYers who are considering solar and need help in identifying the type of system that works best for their needs. What we are going to talk about include how grid tie works and what happens when the grid goes down, adding batteries and what that looks like, off-grid battery backup as a secondary option that does not export but still uses the grid as a safety net, and basically how all this solar connects to your grid. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. All right, I'm going to begin with a typical grid tie setup. The solar panels capture the energy from the sun. From there it goes to the grid tie inverter. The grid tie inverter converts that power to AC and sends it to your home. From there you either use that power or any excess energy is sent to the grid. Surplus flows out, export flows in, you're credited for any export, you're billed for any import. Now let's evaluate the pros and cons of this setup. The pros are that it's lower cost, it's going to be an easier install, simpler. The permitting process is going to be more streamlined. Some AHJs don't even require permitting if batteries aren't involved and your system is up to a certain size kilowatt. And it has a good rate of return if you have a utility company that offers a good net metering plan, which means that their buyback ratio is pretty close to 1-to-1. The cons is that you have zero outage protection, so if the grid goes down, the solar will go down as well and you'll have no power. And you're dependent on any utility policies from the utility company. Now your next option is you can take grid tie and you can add a battery to it. With this setup, you add batteries to a battery-capable inverter, such as the EG4 18K PV or the FlexBoss 21K. It's great for utilities without a good net metering program, such as California and Arizona. It's particularly useful for time of use, where you charge the energy, when you charge the batteries when energy rates are cheap, and you discharge the batteries when energy rates are expensive. You can also use it for peak time shaving, where if your utility company charges you for peak demand during certain times, you can shift some of that over to solar to help reduce your bill. As you can see, it's a very similar setup to a grid tie setup. All you're really doing at this point is adding a battery to the application. Now, adding batteries doesn't ensure that you're not going to have backup. Anti-outing rules still apply. You need to create a critical loads panel, which is a separate sub-panel for all the loads you want to back up when the grid goes down. This involves relocating from your main panel to the new sub-panel. Anything that you keep in the main panel stays dark. You can create an off-grid system that will go in between the grid and all the loads you want to power off-grid. This inverter over here is going to be one of your best bets for that. This is a 12,000 XP. Each one of these units have 100 amps of pass-through. So 2 of these units would give you 200 amps of pass-through. And with that, there's not going to be any net metering, there's going to be zero export. You're just going to use the power that your solar produces to power all your loads. And when that doesn't work, you have the fallback of these inverters being able to pull from the grid to power all your loads. Now the one drawback to that is that these do have an either or type of situation. So what that means is that when you can no longer power the loads with your solar, it'll switch over to the grid and use the grid to power your loads, charge your batteries, but you can't do both at once. It's one or the other. So as you can see here, in this situation, Your solar panels go to your inverter. Your inverter is connected to your utility. But then you have your batteries connected to your inverter, and you have your off-grid inverter connected to a critical loads panel. So the first thing we're going to do is look at what kind of main service panel you have. And there's a couple different options. Combo panels are very common here in Arizona, where the meter is in the same enclosure as your loads. And then you also have other setups where the meter is separate from your loads panel. So with a combo panel, you have your inverter needs to be between your loads panel and your main service panel. But that involves relocating loads from your combo panel over to your loads panel. So in this diagram here, this shows you taking loads such as the refrigerator, the lighting, TV, pump, could be anything, could be a pool pump. You're basically taking those loads and you're moving them over to a critical loads panel. This is going to be your backup loads panel now. And you can see that the energy can flow either direction. You can send power from the inverter to the critical loads panel, or you can send power from the inverter back to the grid to sell back to the utility company, or use for any loads that are in your main service panel, if any loads do still remain in your main service panel. Now in multiple inverter setups, it gets a little bit more complicated, because what you have to do there is each inverter has its own input or output, so you have to combine them. So each inverter will land at your main utility panel with a breaker serving each inverter, and in turn each inverter will land in a combiner panel, which is basically just a standard old load center that you're going to use to land breakers from the inverters. In this case, each 12,000 XP, you would use 100 amps for each inverter. You would land them in the combiner panel, and then the combiner panel would feed the backup loads panel. And again, the same thing will apply. Your inverters can send power to your backup loads panel, or if it doesn't need it there, it can send it upstream to your load panel. The power loads there, and if it's not used there, then it goes to your utility grid. Now, if these are off-grid inverters, the inverters are only going to supply power to your backup loads. It's not going to send power back to your loads panel. That's only used to pull power when it needs it, when solar's not enough to power your loads. Now, one thing that these diagrams don't show is they don't get into any AC disconnects. They don't get into any PV production meters. It doesn't show any transfer switches if you needed to bypass the inverter and send any grid power to your backup loads panel. We'll cover stuff like that in future videos. Well, we covered a lot today, so let's bring it all together and do a quick summary of what we talked about. First, we talked about grid tie installations. These are your standard cheapest solution to go solar. It's going to help reduce your bill, but at the end of the day, when the grid goes down, so does your solar. After that, you have grid tie with battery. This is really good for helping reduce your peak demand charges or optimizing your time of use when your rates are the highest with your utility company. These are becoming more popular now because buyback rates are getting less and utility companies' peak demand charges are going up. So this is a great solution for that. The drawback to this is that still when the grid goes down, you lose power to your system. In order for you to have backup power when the grid goes down, what you're going to have to do at that point is create a critical loads panel. And with a critical loads panel, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to relocate any loads that are in your service panel into a separate panel, whether that's stuff like refrigerator, lights, maybe a small AC, just some of the things that you want to be able to power when the grid goes down. That's what you're going to have to locate into a critical loads panel that's controlled by just the inverter. Thanks for watching today's video. For questions or comments, please drop them below. We read every one. For anything more in depth, please feel free to go to our website at www.santansolar.com or give us a call. Also check out our socials. for our free monthly workshops.